Drug bust details, free press. We don't have a free press. Do we have a free press? No, I don't necessarily think so. But remember under Harper, when Harper wanted to start limiting people to one question, one follow-up, and they had to stand in line or something like that, and the press lost their mind, and they said, you can't control us, we're the press. And now the Trudeau government has just told them, the media, that they're doing a conference on Korea and Canada's relationship, and questions about that will be asked, will be accepted, nothing else. And so the press was like, no, so I'll show you that. So there's lots to get to. Let's get to it. So I've changed the beginning of the show. One of the things that I do want to highlight is I often talk about the structure of how we pay taxes, how we are being charged over, like we pay taxes on taxes. The carbon tax is charged on GST, which is just unbelievable. And like, incorrect. You shouldn't really do that. And it makes us poor. And Canadians know that. But I talk about ways that we could do it differently, like remove the income tax completely. And is there a way to do that? And what would that do? Well, these guys are talking about it because Donald Trump is saying, yeah, we should remove the income tax completely. No tax on tips, no tax on overtime, remove the income tax completely. This guy goes through what will happen if that happens in the United States. And I'd like to have some of that, please. Yes, please. How can a Canadian political party not sell this? Why isn't any political party selling this? We could do this. Why don't we do this? Here is the possibilities when you think outside the box and you are unshackled from corporate masters. Here we go.
And even 18.
Oh, too fast. I'm sorry. I didn't even. It's 4 minutes, and 4 minutes is no time at all in double speed, right? It's 2 minutes, and you're just like, oh man, that's such a good use of 2 minutes, right? Whereas 4 minutes can seem arduous. 2 minutes is no time at all. Okay, here is what I meant to show in regular speed. Here we go.
And even 18 million veterans. I kept hoping he would come out and just break up with the income tax once and for all, and indeed he did. So what if we end the income tax, laying off all 93,643 IRS agents? So you can keep every dollar you earn. Will Washington have to run on bake sales? Well, the income tax currently costs the American people $2.4 trillion a year. Trump proposes to replace it with tariffs of 20% on everybody but China, who gets an extra special 60% tariff. Altogether, that might bring in about $900 billion a year. This would grow America's economy like rocket fuel. I run through some numbers on the free Substack, but maybe near term we're talking a 20% increase in the economy, so about a $15,000 raise for the typical American family. Note that's on top of the $18,000 of income tax you would no longer have to pay. Knock off $3,000 for the tariffs and you get about $30,000 in additional income for the typical American family, close to $3,000 per month. Keeps getting better because going by low-tax countries today, or America before the income tax, we might expect a doubling of annual economic growth. So 5% growth would be the new normal. Your kids would be 3 times richer than you as it used to work in America. America would be by far the richest country in the world, also as it was before the income tax. Of course, ditching the income tax would also mean the mother of federal budget holes. After all, replacing $2.4 trillion with $900 billion is a big hole. Even if you add, say, an extra $500 billion in payroll and excise tax from economic growth, you've still got about $1 trillion to cover. Now, we could just let it run in deficit, letting the economy outgrow it. I mean, that's what they do with everything else that does not grow the economy. But you could also cut $1 trillion in federal spending out of the $6.5 to $7 trillion that we currently spend. How would one do such a thing? Well, the other day, Elon Musk estimated he could cut $2 trillion in waste and fraudulent payments. Ron Paul responded suggesting the military-industrial complex and the pharma-industrial complex. Indeed, going by countries like Britain, perhaps 800 out of the 900 billion we spend on military is not for protecting Americans, so border or Coast Guard nukes, it's for invading other countries. As for pharma, really the medical industrial complex, if we simply copy countries like Singapore, we might save around about $2 trillion or more, and Americans would not go bankrupt getting knee surgery.
So we'll just leave it there. So he's talking very clearly about balance, right? On one side of things, you can create an economy where Americans are a whole lot richer. The economy gets rocket fuel supercharged and it grows by 20%. And at the same time, you have to balance that out by pulling out expenditures that are maybe erroneous in the federal government. And he said, well, we could do that easy-ozy. All we have to stop doing is, giving a whole bunch of money from the federal government to big pharma and having that giant military industrial complex that goes and invades other countries for us. If we stopped all of that, we could easily afford this plan. So like, and I think that's a good idea, but I'm not running a country or anything like that. So maybe there are things I don't know, but it sounds great to me, right? Here's Jamil Jivani. He's an MP, new MP. He's been talking a lot lately. He says new data confirms that Trudeau's tax hikes are making Canadians poorer. The average American now earns $20,000 more than the average Canadian. Liberals have cut the standard of living in our country. We could fix the system. The system is the problem. And I think that's illustrated very well by the potential of what can be done if you remove those erroneous taxes, if you cut the taxes and allow the economy to really grow and become supercharged, versus, hey, it looks like those people are making money and that means they can afford more taxes, is the mantra of our Canadian government. Now, the US stuff, I was going to go into Elon Musk and Ron Paul and then them attacking Donald Trump, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I want to stick really tight with Canadian politics. We'll talk about the United States at the end. But of course, we're 4 days out from the election. 3 days out? It's the second. 3 days out. So 3 days out from the election. And it's going to become important in about 10 days. when they finish the counts, right? Obviously. And they get it and they realize that Kamala's won. Because unless there's a plan, I hope there's a plan. I really hope there's a plan, because if there's not a plan, holy cow. But if there's not a plan and Donald Trump isn't actually elected on the 5th, like probably announced by the 5th, if they're able to drag this thing out a day or 2 or 3, they're reconciling. And if they can do that, bingo, bango, bongo, they've got a system with a secret sauce that wins every single election. And that system is, we're just going to hold our breath and pretend that we've won until everybody just lets us win. And like, seems to be working. Anyway, Giovanni is saying $20,000 more. Like, I've already said what he said. But it's incredible that a system that's so bad can function with no pushback. Nobody even really cares that they take half your money to taxes. Nobody cares that they use that money that they take from your paycheck and send it to Ukraine for reasons, right? Do you get anything out of that? Because I sure as heck haven't. The Whistle Stop Cafe. Let's talk about Alberta. He says, we have a very big problem, folks. I don't know if I didn't know any better, I would think that our government is trying to pull a fast one on us. They've removed important rights, freedoms, and protections from the proposed amended Alberta Bill of Rights. And even worse, they've added a clause that mirrors Section 1 of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. I have been through and continue to be involved in the judicial process, and I can tell you from experience with certainty that Section 1 of the Charter is exactly why the Constitution did not protect us through the COVID debacle. Every charter challenge or Constitution challenge has failed or been struck, due to Section 1, as far as I know. Now, a conspiracy-minded person would say that people playing a long game would put somebody like Pierre Elliott Trudeau in to introduce this watered down Charter of Rights in order to have his son implement, using that Charter of Rights, tyranny in Canada. I mean, a conspiracy-minded person might say that, right? Anyway, because the original Charter of Rights had protections for unborn children, had protections for Canadians' rights without that clause 1 of giving it to a judge to interpret if this is a limitation that's reasonable in a democratic society, which is absolutely nonsense. Anyway, regardless, we have an Alberta Bill of Rights, back to this, at the moment, that does not specifically offer the protections we would have needed to keep our rights during the pandemic, the quote pandemic, and it does not contain wording like Section 1. The proposed amended Alberta Bill of Rights that was presented to government also did not have the wording, but what the government has tabled for the debate does include it. Why? Why does the current government feel the need to add a clause to the Alberta Bill of Rights that gives them leave to set aside our rights if they feel it's justified? We saw this happen hundreds of times as people went to court for masks, feeding people pizza, having dinner at their mother's house, holding church services, etc. We watched Sheila Lewis perish because of her choice over what vaccinations she would accept. We were not protected by anything. If Section 1 had not been in the Charter, we would have had a very different outcome in court. That's what this proposed Alberta Bill of Rights is all about, protecting you from the government. In an unfortunate turn of events, the government, or more accurately, their lawyers, is now trying to pull a fast one on you and install protections for government into our Bill of Rights. We cannot allow this to happen. We need every single advocacy group in the province working together to fix this. ABB, TBA, 1905, Alberta First, JCCF, Rebel, all the freedom groups, political parties, everyone. If there's ever been a reason to set aside our differences for common cause, it's now. We can argue about the rest later. The Premier sent out an email pretending to ask you if you want more rights. Yes or no were the only options. There should have been a third critically important option. Yes, we support a Bill of Rights that protects the people and does not add protections for government. I will be returning to Alberta ASAP in order to vote at the UCP AGM. Here's my criteria for the leadership vote. I will not wait until after the AGM when Bill 24 goes back to debate. If Premier Smith refuses to be the champion for Albertans' rights that we know she can be, if she allows government lawyers to ruin our Bill of Rights with the Section 1 clause, I will be voting against her in the leadership review this weekend. This may come as a surprise to you, since most of you know that I have tremendous respect for Danielle and have been mostly supportive, but that's how important this issue is. It is make or break for me, as it should be for all Albertans. If Danielle announces that she will make sure that this Section 1 wording will not be present in the bill once it returns to the House next week, I will be voting in support of her as leader of the party. In my school of hard knocks, educated experience is the most important issue right now, and we cannot lose on this front. Please, let's unite on this one. Please, let's share this with everyone you can think of. Let's take steps to making this the most free and prosperous province in the country. Chris, P.S. Wouldn't you love to know exactly who within government decided it would be a good idea to insert a government protecting clause into the People's Bill of Rights? I sure would like to know. Do the right thing, Danielle. And so this was a long statement, and I think a necessary one, but I can shorten it up to just this comment very quickly. What's your game, Danielle Smith? Hopefully the game is going to protect Albertans' rights, but I fear that's not her game. And so I think maybe some rocky times ahead for Alberta, but we'll see, because I don't think Danielle Smith's going to walk away from leadership at this point in time. Here is the port strike. So the port strike that was going to shut down Canada and make chocolate cereal very difficult to get, that was called off because they were essential workers by the government, is now back on. Maybe, but not both, just one. $500 million a day, not $1 billion a day. So, I mean, nothing, right? Pennies, who cares? They could print that money, no problem. Here's a City News report.
BC's ports could be shut down once again as a labor dispute escalates.
We simply can't afford to have Canada's largest gateway shut down again by another dispute.
On Thursday, the union representing about 700 foremen issued a 72-hour strike notice, and in response, the BC Maritime Employers Association issued a lockout notice starting Monday morning. The union called the threat of a full-scale lockout an overreaction, saying workers only planned limited job action, including an overtime ban.
About $800 million of goods go through the port every day, and this comes at a time where a lot of retailers are gearing up for the holiday season. Any shutdown of the port would impact goods across every industry and every sector.
The two sides have been negotiating since March 2023, when the last contract expired. Despite negotiations with a federal mediator earlier this week, the two sides have been unable to reach a deal, with the main sticking point appearing to be around automation.
So we'll just leave it there. But fundamentally, they were essential workers a little while ago. Not very long ago, the government said, oh, no, this is going to not happen. And now, with the holidays coming up, not so essential, I guess. You guys can go on strike on Monday just before the presidential election. No problem, everyone. CA Bird says 72-hour strike notice has been given Saturday AM for BC Port to be shut down again. $500 million per day in economic impact. Don't worry, this dynamic dual HV, or these guys have it covered. So yeah, I don't know. I have my doubts. Kevin Vung is coming out talking about all of this. Yesterday, I was talking about how the cabinet aides have confirmed the NDP and Liberals were attending secret meetings to rewrite the Election Act. And I think I maybe understated how important it is that the Liberals were having secret meetings with the NDP about changing this whole election thing privately. I think that cutting out all of the other parties, etc., bears special recognition. Like, it seems extra sneaky, right? And Kevin Vung is responding to all of this. He says, in Jagmeet Singh's NDP, they have it completely backwards. Instead of country before party, it's pension before party. The NDP have sold out to become the party of needles, drugs, and pensions for Jagmeet. And so Holly Doan is saying cabinet aides confirm NDP and Liberals attended secret meetings to rewrite Elections Act. One revision One revision guarantees pensions for dozens of MPs. Few records were kept. We don't actually keep any records of our meetings. It's all handshake deals, verbal agreements, right? Oh, that's how you want a government run, right? Jeepers creepers. Here's Maxime Bernier talking about how Melanie Joly is wanting to engage in regime change in Russia, and Canada doesn't have the military or population base to put together a military to protect itself from Russia, in my opinion. Like, we'd be relying on NATO, and that's not great either, right? Like, it's just not great. Because NATO will roll in with tanks, and if your house is in the way of the NATO tanks, well, sorry about that. Your house is in the way, so now you're being redistributed to Toronto downtown, right? We've got a hotel for you right beside the migrant hotel, or something to that effect, right? It's a 15-minute city, and your food package will be crickets, mainly cricket flour and cricket cookies. Like, no thanks. Here's Maxime Bernier talking about how crazy this is.
Last Friday, our Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly gave a press conference to announce more sanctions against Russia. In that press conference, she stated that regime change in Russia is the government's goal. Here's the clip.
Hi there, Dylan Robertson
Hi,
of
Dylan.
Canadian Press. Thanks for
Good to
taking
see
our
you.
questions.
Yeah.
So
It's great.
Minister,
You follow me everywhere I go. Good to see you
I
again,
always
Dylan.
do, which is why I noticed this morning you used a term that I haven't heard you use before, referring to Russia. You talked about regime change. And I was just wondering, at what point in time did that become Canada's policy to advocate for? And I wanted to ask Minister Wittfeldt if that's the right approach to advocate for when it comes to Russia.
Well, we believe that we need to isolate Russia diplomatically, economically, and politically, and that is the regime that I'm referring to, of course. And as I mentioned earlier in the discussion, I always make a difference between the regime and the people of a given country, which is fundamental.
Wow, what the minister said is incredibly reckless and irresponsible. She's basically saying that Canada would support efforts to overthrow the Russian government, a nuclear power that is our neighbor to the north. It is the equivalent to a declaration of war. That would...
The other part about this is, like, the Russian people seem to really like Vladimir Putin. So her saying, don't worry, we're not talking about the Russian people. We're talking about the regime of Vladimir Putin, which the Russian people voted for, and they like him, and they, I think, want to keep him as leader. They don't want to have George W. Bush walk in and, do the job for a couple of years, right? Like, it's just not, that's not what's going to work out for them, or any NATO chosen leader like they installed in Ukraine, right? Like, Zelensky's a joke, right? Like, he's a joke. The food professor is talking. This is our grab bag of governance, by the way, so it's not as coherent as usual. But I mean, the U.S. series is very coherent. The food professor says liberal MPs who have twisted or misrepresented my comments for political gain in the last 6 months, concerning as it detracts from constructive dialogue and undermines the integrity of our discussion on critical issues. So it's interesting how the food professor is trying to hold people accountable for their actions, for dumping dairy, dumping 10 billion liters of milk and other things. And he's getting attacked and he's feeling the heat, right? These people are using his words out of context in order to attack him or misrepresent what he said or attack other people. And it's not helpful because it's not actually trying to solve the problem. And that's a problem, right? And our government is part of the problem. Here's Catherine Tate, the former president of the CPC, and she had a $497,000 a year job, but she got fined for breach of Conflict of Interest Act. She got fined $200 whole. And obviously the ceremonial slap on the wrist, right? She has to go to the House of Commons and Trudeau slaps her on the wrist. And like, sometimes it's light and sometimes it's hard, depends on how Trudeau's feeling that day. That's not actually true. They don't actually do that, but they may as well, right? It's pretty crazy. Failing to report material change in assets. She's making $500,000 a year. If I was making $500,000 to run the CBC, I would feel like that's a lot of money. So I don't know. I don't know what ethic or what changed and what she didn't report it properly or anything like that. But I feel like a $200 fine for somebody in her position is it falls short of making an impact. Stop 293. So Bill C-293 is the Pandemic Preparedness Act, and it it enshrines in law what the WHO wanted to enshrine in law but couldn't do through their WHO maneuvering. So Canada said, don't you worry, we'll pass it into law for you in Canada. And so people don't like it, and I don't like it either. And it's already in the second reading in the Senate, I believe. I think it's on the way to becoming law. It's passed the House of Commons, and I believe it's passed the House. I'm going to look. Hold on. I've got to check it out. Glad I checked. It says it is in the third reading currently in the House of Commons. Third reading. So House of Commons, third reading, I believe. First reading, third reading. So it hasn't passed the House as far as I understand it fully yet, right? It hasn't been sent to the Senate, but I thought it was. But I don't know if it will be sent to the Senate because of the situation in the House of Commons where the Speaker says we have to deal with all this corruption. It seems like we've been dealing with this corruption for a while and not gotten anywhere. So the corruption's got a real tight hold on the Canadian government. Maxime Bernier, though, is being highlighted by Stop C293 Committee. We are delighted to announce that Maxime Bernier, the founder and leader of the People's Party of Canada, will speak at the Stop 293 Committee X Space on Wednesday, November 13th at 7 to 9:30 p.m., including 1 hour of Q&A. Bill C293, Pandemic Preparedness, or Trojan Horse. More details forthcoming. So there you go. Bernier's doing media. So that's interesting. And people are not happy about this. But the government doesn't care. The government super duper doesn't care. Right. So last year, here's global news. Yesterday, I was wondering what the Canadian government struck from the official record because the United States struck Joe Biden's garbage comment because he said that Trump supporters are garbage. And they struck that from the official record concerning stenographers, right? They're very concerned because now things have changed. And I couldn't honestly, during the show, I was like, man, I should come up with how Canada did that too, but I couldn't remember what they had struck from the record. And I Googled it. I was like, what did they strike from the Hansard record? And I couldn't come up with it. So thank you for people who reminded me. But yeah, here's global news. It says Liberals try to strike hunker recognition from the official record. What a mess. So yep, they did. I think they successfully struck it. I couldn't find it. So that's probably my shortcoming though. Dan McTeague is responding to Katie Telford. Katie Telford says Richmond Hill on a precipice of losing $31 million after conservative Pierre Poilievre says HEDAC's Housing Accelerator Fund. Markham and Vaughan stand to lose even more, $58 million and $59 million, respectively. So this is money going to the towns, and Dan McTeague points out the problem with all of this. He says, it doesn't build homes, Katie. That money doesn't build homes. You have no understanding of how this works since you never built a home or a subdivision. It merely gives over money to towns rather than incentivizing builders and developers to build housing that's badly needed to address the shortage. Yeah, there's housing that's been being built near my place for a while. And it's kind of been stuck in kind of a weird limbo. And there are times when it seems like they're going gangbusters and then they'll just stop. And so that's weird, right? You'd think that they're trying to incentivize building. So you'd think that a lot of it would be happening, but I live right around like lots of areas of construction. Guelph is under construction all the time. And nope. So interesting. I've seen lots more construction 5 years ago than now. Lots more. Lots more. Dr. Malouf, let's talk about the invasion ongoing. He says, in all of world history, there's never been a civilization that's opened its doors to another civilization that is so openly hostile to it. For centuries, Islam tried to violently conquer Europe, and now Europe is saying it was all a misunderstanding and welcoming them in. Yeah. Weird. Inevitable West says Marine Le Pen erupts in the French Parliament. She says, I don't understand why foreigners who break the law are allowed to stay here. What compels us to keep them? It's 1:09, and so I guess I'll read what she says. I'll mute it because when she's speaking French and I'm speaking English, it makes it hard. So here we go. I'll just read the words on the bottom. It says, she says, I still can't understand. You tell us that the cases targeted by this bill are not the cases of the OQTF. So what? How does that make it? The presence on our territory and the continued presence of foreigners who have broken the law, who have made victims, who have committed serious offenses, who have committed crimes. Why should these people be allowed to stay on the territory? I've never managed to get a single argument from you. What compels us to keep people who have broken the law on the territory? First, the law of hospitality, and secondly, the law that protects our fellow citizens. Never a single argument from you on this subject. We believe that it restores the dignity of the French to send a clear signal. If you come to our country, then you must respect the French people and French law. And then she flourishes like, that seems obvious. You should. And they don't. The people in our own countries don't respect our own laws, our own celebration, our own dates, things like that. We'll get to Diwali in a minute. Maxime Bernier says, the London UK paper Telegraph published my essay today on how Trudeau's mass immigration policy is destroying our country. You can read it in the following tweets if you can't access it. And he's got the link here, and it says, Maxime Bernier, Canada has become a battleground for warring migrant groups. If things don't change, I don't think my country can survive the 21st century. I don't think he's wrong. So I'm not going to read the whole article, but you can read the whole article here if you're interested. Hold on, I'll see if I can pull out some highlights. I can't highlight the speech as I normally do, so it's harder to do on X. Here is part of the article. Canada is in the process of falling apart. No, it's not because Quebec is once again threatening to hold a referendum on separation, although this might happen again in the coming years. Our country is experiencing a series of crises because of the deliberate policy of mass immigration instigated by Justin Trudeau's Liberal government soon after its election in 2015. Last year, Canada's population increased by almost 1.3 million people, or 3.2%. This was the fastest annual population growth since the post-war years. The difference, however, is this was not caused by a baby boom, since 97% of the growth was due to international migration, mostly from Asia and Africa. This includes not only immigrants per se or permanent residents, but also so-called temporary foreign workers, foreign students, and asylum seekers. Although supposed to be temporary, the last categories have in fact become pathways to seek permanent residency. Because of this, housing in Canada has now become completely unaffordable. Young couples who want to have children just cannot afford to buy a home with a nice backyard where they can raise them anymore, with the result that our birth rate has dropped dramatically. Our hospitals, social services, and infrastructure are being overburdened by this massive demographic tsunami. One of the things, I'm going to highlight this quick, this is me and not Bernier. One of the things that is masking the drop in birth rates is we're importing so many people, and those people are bringing children, right? So we still have kids here, but the birth rate is very low. Right. And so it doesn't look as bad as it actually is. If only we understood how bad it really is. Unfortunately, immigration is often justified by its supporters, or justified by its supposed positive impact on the economy, but productivity and wages have been stagnant for a decade in Canada, as cheap immigrant labor is favored by employers over capital investments and automation. Canadian politics has been mired for months in scandals over foreign influence. It's been years. In particular, China and India. India has been the largest source of immigrants to Canada for several years. Last week, Canada and India expelled diplomats over allegations by the Trudeau government that Indian diplomats have been involved in attacks against Khalistani militants in our country, including the murder last year of one that India considers a terrorist. Because of mass immigration, Canadian politics is more and more focused on actual Canadian issues, more and more focused not on actual Canadian issues, but on ethnic, religious, and foreign issues and wars, with establishment politicians spending an extraordinary amount of time courting the votes of minority ethnic groups in suburban marginal ridings. The third most important national party, the New Democrat Party, that has kept the Trudeau minority government in power, is headed by Jagmeet Singh, a Sikh by background. He initially declined to condemn Talwinder Singh Parmar, the mastermind responsible for the 1985 bombing of an Air India plane in which hundreds of Canadians were killed. However, Singh did change his stance when a Canadian inquiry concluded that Parmar was definitely behind the outrage. And it continues, but I'll leave it there. So immigration is harming our country, and we can't even get into the media to talk about it. We have to go to foreign countries in order to talk about it. Maxime Bernier again, he's talking. Yesterday, I reported that Quebec was going to pause key immigration programs for permanent residents. That's true, but Bernier adds a little bit more color. He says, contrary to what has been circulating on social media for the past 2 days, there is no moratorium on immigration in Quebec. Many have interpreted the Legault government's announcement this week as a halt to immigration. It's quite the opposite. The government is planning to bring in even more immigrants next year. All it did was freeze 2 programs for a few months because they exceeded its targets for new permanent residents this year. The only party that is proposing a real moratorium for all of Canada is the People's Party of Canada. So there you go. Here is Justin Trudeau, and he's saying Diwali is a Canadian holiday now, and ex-detective says, why even push this on all of the Canadians? They're Christian. And Zoltan says, Justin Trudeau thinks Diwali is about him. So this is 40 seconds, but I only want to show you the last 10 or 15. So 15-second Trudeau warning. Here we go.
Celebrate this extraordinary ceremony and time of year. It has become a celebration for Canadians, all Canadians.
Did you forget Halloween? Right? And Greg highlights this. He says the illusion of choice. So there's Justin Trudeau and there's Pierre Poilievre, both wearing scarves, both, right? It's indistinguishable. They're the same picture. They're the same. Corporate wants you to tell us the difference between these two pictures. Rex Glacier says, okay, let's move on. We'll talk about China and Chinese interference, foreign interference, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And National Post says, all of a sudden, when the Prime Minister is facing a caucus revolt, Canadians are supposed to believe that Poilievre might not even get a security clearance or pass a security clearance. And Rex Glacier says, we can never forget that the only reason we know about these traitors Trudeau is covering up for and why we are even talking about foreign interference is because a fed up CSIS leaker who spoke up because Trudeau didn't care about any of it, Trudeau wants the leaker arrested. So they're trying to distract from the fact that there are Chinese traitors in the government by saying Poilievre doesn't even have the security clearance to have the details on this. But of course, the security clearance is a trap to muzzle Poilievre. But this is their only attack line, and they can say nothing about the Chinese traitors themselves. Mary Ng is saying, according to Blacklock's reporter, I'm a loyal Canadian. Trade Minister Mary Ng tells reporters after being asked if she's a Chinese spy, I serve my country. Those are a bit of weasel words, right? Right? Like, because if you say, I serve my country, you could be talking about Canada, but you could also be talking about China, right? You serve your country. Well, do you? Unfortunately, her country seems to be communist China, says Lee. Yeah, maybe. Bradshaw's responding to this as well. I serve my country. Bradshaw says, if Mary Ng is so loyal and pissed off that they're trying to defame her character by saying she's a Chinese spy, why doesn't she sue them? Mary has access to the best lawyers, and when hasn't a Liberal taken advantage of that? So it's interesting because fundamentally, she doesn't want to get into a situation where there's legal discovery and she has to give over evidence that she doesn't want to give over. So she's not going to sue anybody over this, but as far as I'd be surprised. I'd be surprised. Who knows? Who knows what people are going to do? But she says, no, I'm innocent. It's not me. She says, not at all. Let's talk about free speech. Hello, everyone. Thanks very much for watching. This is just a short version of a longer show. If you'd like to get the whole show, you can go over to CanadaPoly.com and sign up for a subscription. Just look in the drop-down tab for Shop and Donate and look for subscriptions, and you'll get immediate access to the full show. Love to see you. Thanks for watching, everybody. Have a wonderful, wonderful